Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you, all of you guys, for being here today, and those online, thanks for being part of our family. Um, as you know, livingmessiah.com is our website. You can donate there. If your heart moves you to do so, you can always leave a thumbs up. Let me go ahead and open in prayer. Father Yahweh, great and mighty you are. There is none like you, Yahweh. There is none unique. Father, we thank you for this day that you set aside for us to get to know you, to rest. Father, and we do want to understand your ways. We want to be encouraged by your spirit. We've been empowered by you. Father, today as we look into your words and the words of your Son, Father, be with us and just continue to help us as you have. We thank you again. Amen. And as usual, if you have a comment or question, just raise your hand. The mic's back there, and someone will get it and get it to you. And we just ask be on point to what we're talking about, and try to be brief in case there's other comments. We all want to learn together. That's, I think, a very, very important thing. As far as review, first, before I review, I want to thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for sitting in. He did an excellent job. Wouldn't all of you agree? Yes, thank you, Paul, so much for doing that. Obviously, you know we're in the book of Acts, chapter 1. Paul pretty much finished it. There is, and maybe just as a review, we'll do that this week. This time around, hopefully we'll get all to it. And next week we'll get into chapter 2, because I know you guys are all anxious to get to chapter 2 and all the events that happen there. So, and to be quite honest, I was away, and I this week I was just getting back into this particular part of my studies that I do, and I just didn't want to throw something together as we get into, especially chapter 2. So that being said, where we're at in the book of Acts, right here in chapter 1, the ending part of chapter 1, Yeshua has been taken up. He's been taken up into the clouds. We talked about that. Now, the apostles, the taught ones, right now, what's happening, they're returning back to Jerusalem, to a place that they were staying for this coming feast. Okay? So, real quickly, what festival season is it at this time? You can just yell it out. What feast is, maybe I'll put it this, what is the feast that's going to be coming up here real soon in Acts, not in us as a community, but in Acts itself? Shavuot, I hear, yes it is. Shavuot is that feast. Now what's interesting, this coming feast, in my opinion, is, I would say, it's like the spine of a book. Like there's a picture in your head. To me, this feast is the one that binds all the others together, that being, the spring and the fall feast. And we all know these are appointed times set down by our Father for the children to attend, to be part of. So these, another thought came to me, is think of it as a steel ring, if you will, a steel ring that's welded together. And the feast is that connecting point, the weld itself. The weld itself. So this feast is associated, as we will see, is associated with Mount Sinai. The giving of the Torah, the giving of the instructions, right? This is where the feast of Shavuot, the giving of the commandments, the feast, to me then is the one that's unifying. It unifies all the other 6 appointed times together. It makes the cycle of the harvest complete. And I know it's in the center, but I think it's very important what it does. And it's also part of if this cycle, if this weld and what it represents, and again, my opinion I'm putting here, this idea is Shavuot. Shavuot is where the commandments come down, are given. So all the other feasts, in some ways, not going to make any sense. You know, don't know what to do in them or how to, how to behave without this one. Because if you take this feast out, which would be Mount Sinai, the giving of the Torah, all you have then is just, gathering points. But like I said, Shavuot, that's where the commandments on how to, the how to. So, and ultimately that includes the cycle redemption that we see in the picture of the feast too. So the key thought to focus on today that I'm looking at is this one, being one, united, echad even, okay? Like-minded, and we'll see this in the text, like-minded. 1 Corinthians 2:16 says this, "For who has known the mind of Yahweh? Who shall instruct him? No one gives him counsel, but we have the mind of the Messiah." Now, the mind of the Messiah. Now, obviously, there's much more to the context of this verse, okay? And in short, it leads to the idea, if you want to be spiritual, then you go obey the commandments. But the mind of Messiah, that's what we want. That's what we should desire, to understand the mind of Messiah. So, with all that, let's get back to Acts, where I want to begin. And when they came in, and when they went up to the upper room where they were staying, both Peter, Jacob, John, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, and Matthew, Jacob, the son of Alphaean, Simon, the zealot, and Judah, the son of Jacob. All these were continuing with one mind in prayer and supplication with the women and Miriam, the mother of Yeshua, and with his brothers. And in these days, Kepha, Peter, standing up in the midst of the taught ones, and there was a gathering about 120, said such and such. So, first, during the 3 pilgrimage feasts, many would be staying together in various locations in and around the city, because this is one of those pilgrimage feasts where all the males are to come. So it makes sense that this upper room could be any of the various places. People would rent out spaces, or they would be connected to a family member that lived close to the city or whatever. Okay. So in that sense, I don't want to go over too much of that. That's a little bit of background on this idea of the upper room, or where it would be and what it is. Obviously, right now it's outside of Jerusalem, or it is in Jerusalem, maybe within the city, someone's house. Okay? 120, that number popped up, and it's an interesting number. It pops up in a lot of other places. So that's something that I would suggest go and research. And maybe there's other nuggets of information that you can gain on the number 120. But the other part I want to look real quickly before we go too far here, or till we get to the main idea of one mind, is, Peter seems to be a leader here. He seems to be the one that comes to the forefront. And it kind of makes sense. It really does kind of make sense, because I know with us here, we just got through the book of John. Back in John 21:14, remember this? This was now the 3rd time that Yeshua was manifested to his taught ones after he has risen from the dead. Then therefore they had eaten breakfast, Yeshua said to Simon, to Peter, "Do you love me?" Remember that? "Do you love me?" He said it 3 times. Ultimately, Yeshua said this. He said to him, to Peter, "Yea, Master, you know I love you." And then Yeshua said, he said to him, "Feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my ewes," however you want to look at it. But the basic idea we can get somehow, not that this didn't apply to the others as well, but we do see Peter, maybe in some sense, Yeshua was electing to him to be a leader of this group, so to speak. So with that in mind, what was the one thing that Yeshua saw? Maybe we can conclude that Yeshua saw in Peter, why he would place him in a position of leadership. What is one thing? And I'm basing this on Messiah's teachings and the things he said. I think the one thing that we can see that maybe Yeshua saw in Peter for such a position, and maybe for all, is this. Matthew 23:10 says this, "Neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, the Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be your servant." So is it possible here that in some ways Yeshua saw a servant in Peter? Yes, Joe. So I think that that's maybe one conclusion that we can come from Peter being in this position and why Messiah saw a servant. Yes, Joe.
Was this before Peter walked on the water or afterwards?
I really don't. I don't know about that part.
But I was thinking about that, but also I was thinking when Yeshua asked Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" It's how somehow Peter had an insight that he didn't even realize himself, that God saw God saw something in him. Yeshua saw something in him. The foreknowledge of Peter, that Peter was more of a doubter, but other places where he confirmed Peter's faith.
Yes, no, and I think there's many things that we can see in the character of Peter, and why he was maybe in this position or in that sense. So, no, I do see that. So, but I think ultimately to have a servant's heart is one of those major things, and we see that in David, we see that in other people as well, how they were called to be. And those who were great at leading were great servants. So what I want to do is this one mind, I think, is interesting here to point out. Now, you might say, okay, at least for me, I think it was important to understand this, because all these continued with one mind in prayer and supplication with the women and so on. But they were all with one mind. One mind. Maybe your translation has with one accord or in one accord. All these continue with one accord. The Greek here, I want to look at. So in one accord, so they all had one Honda that they all shared. And that's how they got around Galilee and everywhere else. Are we paying attention here? Okay. But this is an interesting word for me. And this is an interesting concept that we have here. Okay? One mind with one accord. This Greek word is interesting. With some of my research looking into it, it's unique. It's used 12 times total, okay? And 11 of them are in Acts. I think that's pretty interesting, especially when we see what's happening in Acts, especially when it starts to begin here that they were with one mind. Okay? And what does that mean, with one mind? Okay? But it's interesting. It's made up, this Greek word is made up of two compound words, to rush along and in unison. Okay? So it has the image is almost a musical idea behind this. And I believe when I was looking at it, and I could be incorrect here, but we use the word harmony or harmonize to, I believe this Greek or our English word is derived out of this and some of the things I was looking at, which is kind of interesting, to be in harmonized, to be in harmony with each other, right? So here's this Greek word, and I highlighted with one mind of one accord. But I wanted to go back to the Hebrew, because that's got to be our connection. Ultimately, the Old Testament needs to be our connection and understanding things. The other thing I did find out about this word, some of the Greeks seem to be inconsistent when it used it. So I just went by the Septuagint, where the Strong's, I have the Strong's number here, I'll share in just a bit, and in my tracing it. So in the Septuagint, it occurs 20 times in 20 verses in the Greek. I don't even want to try to pronounce it. Homotha Adon, something to that effect. Okay? I even listened to it over and over again, but for the sake of the study, going from this Greek word that it's used in the Septuagint, and then going back in the Old Testament to the Hebrew, the number, it matches up to the Hebrew, Yachad. Now, what is interesting about this, I found it in this particular verse. First of all, Exodus 19. What's going on in Exodus 19? They have come to Mount Sinai. They come to the place where the Torah is, the instructions for life is going to be given. And this you should remember, Mark, we do this at when? Shavuot. And all the people answered together. Together they answered and said, all that he, Yahweh, has spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people to Yahweh. Joe, you have a comment?
Yeah, it wasn't an individual answer, but it was the whole assembly were saying the same thing in union.
In union. I like that word because that, to me, is an English word that applies in like manner in what we're going to be looking at. So, in Exodus 19, we're at the mountain, obviously. And we just discussed in a little bit about Shavuot, the feast that's going on in Acts right now, is about Mount Sinai, about the same place that's about to come upon them in the next chapter. So that's why I wanted to go back and see this idea. First of all, they're in one mind. And this idea we see, if I traced it correctly from the Greek to the Hebrew, we end up at Mount Sinai with that same idea of having one mind. So all the people answered with one mind and said that unity like he spoke about. Now, as we look at this, that can be a struggle, can it not be? I'm sure I'm not the only one that struggles with being unified with a group of people. All right? Even with the greater community, even here at community, we have to, it's something that we all have to work on. It's not easy. Okay? If we're, at least for me, if we're honest with ourselves, it's not always easy to be unified, to be with one mind with all my brothers and sisters. Okay? But this Hebrew word, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say, go ahead. Okay. Okay.
You want to repeat what he said? Or go on. Okay, Kathy.
I was just confirming, because I have the ability to take the Greek word back to the Hebrew, and it is the Greek word that you're showing here, the 36, what was it, 3162, is this word used for yakda and for together. No, his strong number is there for Greek, or for Hebrew is 3162. And the Greek word used there is the same word there, 3661.
Okay, great. I did it correctly. So I'm not leading you guys astray with words today.
Well, my comment was on what you had just said last. It's interesting that what they came together on was not anything outside of the Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
Their common denominator was, we agree to do what you ask us to do here. They laid aside maybe their differences of different perceptions on whatever may have been going on, but they agreed to whatever you say, we will do. And that was what drew them and brought them together. It's kind of probably a picture of the end days when we all come together. We're all different, come from different backgrounds, different thoughts, but what we'll come together on is the king, his kingship, and what he asks us to do. We can all agree upon that.
Yes. No, I think that's great. Thank you, Polly. So this is going to be interesting here, because the Hebrew word yachad, okay, it has with it that idea to be likewise together. Yes, Joe, I'll let you go and then we can continue.
The gathering didn't address God directly, but they spoke to Moses. And Moses returned to the Lord what the people had said.
Yes, I agree. But they were in unison. They said together. They answered together whatever the Father had proposed to them.
I think the simile meant well, but as time went by, they didn't they forgot all about this like that, But I think in the beginning, it's like we are today. Our hearts are in the right place, but when things get rough and everything, when the rubber hits the road, there's a different thing.
Yes, no, we all have this very struggle that is here in the text. I know we all have this. So, like I said, right here, going from what's happening in Acts, the relationship back to through that word back to Exodus 19 to the Mount Sinai. So, with this Hebrew word, I have some other things I want to present to you, this Hebrew word, and then I'll show you a little bit more about it. But this Hebrew word, yachad, okay, In Chronicles, it's interesting how it gets translated over. In Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 12:23, this gives you an idea what's going on. And these are the numbers of the bands that were ready armed to the war, and came to David in Hebron to turn the king of Saul to him according to the word of Yahweh. So we have this group of people that are banding together to put David king in the position. Then here's where this word pops up. It's interesting. 1 Chronicles 12:38, as you go a little bit further. All these men of war that could keep rank came with a perfect heart to Hebron. That's how it translates over. But it's the same, they came together, they unified together to Hebron to make king over Israel, and all the rest also of Israel were of one heart to make David king. Now, it's interesting, the idea with the heart and the mind in the Hebrew aspect are really like one and the same. To have one mind is to have one heart, and to have one heart is to have one mind. So this yachad word, oh, I'm sorry, I should have had this up for you guys as I read. These are the sections that you'll find this idea in the Chronicles. But what's so interesting that I saw with this word, because I'm like, oh man, that sounds very familiar to me. And I think maybe some of you, it does sound very, very familiar. Yachad. It sounds a lot like echad, right? And what I'm referring to is Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh echad. He is one. Well, there is a relationship with this idea of oneness with Yachad and Echad. Here's the two words in Hebrew side by side, and what do you see? The major difference is what would be the letter before. So, Echad 259, we're familiar with that. United, one, alike, all together. These are some of the words that are in this. And they seem to be the same definition as, and I'm sure there's differences between the two words, but they seem to have the same core idea behind it. And that, I think, is important. So these two Hebrew words have the same parent root in common. There's the Yachad, in unity together, all things in unity with something else. One man is a unit of a body, breath, mind. You get the just, unified, union, togetherness. He got his act together. You know, those are the types of things that we have. And then Echad, it's almost the same definition. And I forgot to put it in here. I got this from Jeff Banner's site of Ancient Hebrew Research Center. And it's interesting. So that parent root that's there, the parent concept, the picture behind all this for us to understand that's in both of these words. It's this idea of a wall that separates the inside from the outside. And only through the door one can exit. And the door is the one that unites the inside with the outside. So this pictograph is a picture wall, or is a wall. and a door. The Het and the Dalet. Echad. So my purpose, or my proposed purpose, one reason for this feast, Shavuot, is uniting his people. Not that the other feasts don't, but this particular feast, if it's associated with the commandments, that's a real unifier, because we all can have feasts or do things, but it's the commands that unite them, unite the children. And this goes back to what I see that was in what we are reading, where it said they had one mind. They were in accord with each other, one heart, one mind. Maybe this one feast, I would suggest, unites them all and unites everything, because that's where the commandments lie at Mount Sinai. The union of unions, so to speak. And that's why I'm saying knowing the background of the feast and its relationship to the past events can only help us understand Acts in chapter 2 specifically, and so many other things as well. So they were in one mind, they had one mindset. And that's important. It is, or that was at Mount Sinai the reasoning for them to coming together, to have this one type of mindset in some sense. One mindset. So if they came together in Acts here, we just read, with one mind, what were they unifying themselves on? It surely can't be the New Testament, because it has not even a thought yet to write down. So they came together unified with other information. I would suggest the things that are written down before, specifically Mount Sinai with the Torah. Because it's only been 40 days and they are come to be unified. So again, their minds can only be, in some sense, unified over what was written before. Yes, Joe?
There's two types of contracts. One is a legal written contract, and the other one is a verbal. Okay, in this incident where it was a verbal content, God was presenting the people, if you do this, I will do that. It was a verbal contract. It wasn't a legal contract. But when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, that was a written contract.
Mm-hmm.
But then the oral contract was from that.
I don't know what oral contract.
Huh?
What do you mean by oral contract?
The verbal, like if you and I, we had agreement, I will do this like this, that. It was a shake hands and that type of verbal contract.
But I see that our God, He's done both. He did both.
That's right,
Yeah.
He did.
Thank you, Joe. So what I want to, with this concept, Mount Sinai, like I said, has a connection here with this feast. This idea of one we have read about before Mount Sinai. And I happen to have it up already for you to look at. Even before Mount Sinai, this word echad that I changed over, that we're tracking down, pops up in Genesis 11. And the earth was one language and one speech. They were unified here. And it came to be, I'll read on here. And it came to be, as they set out from the east, that they found a plain in the land Sinara, and they dwelt there. And they said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And it goes on, and obviously, you know, I'm talking about the Tower of Babel. But this idea of one language and one speech, what does that have to do with the study that we're going to start to look into next week in Acts 2? And I believe we have to understand what was going on way back here. It's only going to help when we help us understand now as well. This occurred after the flood, obviously. These are the clans of the son of Noah according to the generation in their nations, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. Now, I know there's a lot of stuff in and around this. I am just focusing on the simplicity of what's behind it, because there's a lot of different mindsets about all this. But if we focus on just the simplicity of what's going on, I think that's beneficial to all. One language and one speech. And all the earth had one language, one speech. So this one language, one speech. So I looked into the idea that the language, that Hebrew word being used here, it has the idea of a lip. Your translation may even say lip, okay, as a natural boundary, because that is what your lip is. And obviously you speak through it. So you can get the concept of why language is associated here. Then the other word, speech, I brought forward here, and it's devar. And we've heard that word before. Word, right? Devar. The 10 words that were what? Given at Mount Sinai. So all the various understandings of these two words, I'm simplifying it down to this idea of boundary and commandment. Boundary and commandment. That should sound familiar to some of you if you watch or you participated in Tuesday night's Bible study that Paul did. What came up in the study was this idea about boundaries. So what's going on at this Tower of Babel? Because all of them, were of one speech, one lip. To me, it insinuates they had a one mindset of what they were after and what they wanted to do. They were echad, unified. But the issue is they were unified with what they wanted to do. They were not unified with Yahuwah. So I think that is one of the things that we could bring forward when we look into what happens at Shavuot. It's already happening, we read. They were in one mind. They were coming together. And it seemed to be a positive thing. Back here, all the way back here at the Tower of Babel, it didn't seem like a good thing. The Father divided them out, put boundaries between them. But with this coming feast, it seems He's bringing forth a unification in a different manner. That is according to what He is all about, according to His commandments, according to His word. And then in that, we all see in the commandments, like we see, there's boundaries. He's setting the boundaries, not us. He'll set the boundaries for humanity, what is good for us and what is not. So, like I said, back here in the Old Testament, at the Tower of Babel, they were unified, but it wasn't a good thing. The speech was mixed. It seems to be really, and that caused confusion. Man was united with his own ways, not united with Elohim's ways. Boundary and commandment. And we see Mount Sinai, there is a lot of association with this idea of language. The rabbis talk a lot about that, and we can talk about some of that next week. So in brief, all these were continuing with one mind. And I did this study to show you there's a lot behind that little phrase. We have to understand or do our best that we can to understand these phrases and what's being talked about. So this idea of one mind in one prayer, and like how Polly pointed out too, it's they're being unified here. And we're going to see something happen at Shavuot. That's maybe I can say is going to be opened up for others to become one-minded. Joe.
You're absolutely right with the Tower of Babel, because the language says they said to one another, which is a unification, come, let us make this done.
Mm-hmm.
And then in verse 4 it says, let us build. And they keep using us. So they were all in one card. This is what we're going to do. And then the other.
Exactly. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because these kind of concepts that we are just going over are going to reoccur again, because it's now going to be open to others. And instead of them coming together to build a tower, they're going to come together to build people and build a community. Yes, Mark.
So it's, again, so awesome when God brings both of us into some common threads. Since you're talking about Shavuot, you're talking about one mind. Our Torah portion is about the first fruit offering that's brought on Shavuot, and the people are coming in one mind.
Oh, awesome. So I wanted to go, thank you, Mark. I wanted to go over this only because I just thought it was very important to understand this actually idea of one-mindedness and how much it does relate to us of, not being unified for unity's sake, but if we can be unified under his commandments, all right, that's what I believe he desires. That does not take away any of our uniqueness of who we are, but we should strive the best that we possibly can to be unified under our Father's commandments, okay? And that's doing them and acting on them. And we all need to work on that, so that's important. Yes, Joe?
This same idea is covered in the New Testament, where it says, let us be one accord in Yeshua, one accord in salvation, one accord in doing God's will, all these things, and talking about let there be no division between brothers and sisters in the Lord.
Yes. No, thank you, Joe. So that's where we're at. We just got one. I'm going to read right through real quickly the rest, and then, well, maybe not. I'll just continue reading here. Let me go back. And in those days, Kepha, standing up in the midst of the taught ones, and there was a gathering about 120. 15. Oh, I skipped a little bit. But then as the story goes on, it talks about Judas. They want to put someone in the place of Judah, the one who delivered Messiah up. Paul went over. He talked about this place, the field of blood. He spoke about that. We don't need to go over that. But what I think is interesting, though, the only thing to add to what Paul was talking about is just this concept. Remember, it's only been 40 days, and Judas has died in that 40 days. I just think that's interesting. He talks about the field of blood, and let's continue on here. And they put forward to Joseph called Barsaba, who also called Justus and Mattiyahu. So they drew lots. They chose the one to take the position of Judas. And next week we will start Acts chapter 2, verse 1. So let me close in prayer. Father Yahweh, great and mighty you are. Father, we thank you for your love, your mercy. Father, be with us today. May it be pleasing that our thoughts and our words and our praise to you be just that, be pleasing. Father, thank you again for your love and your mercy. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. I'm glad all of you came in today, and those online, thanks for joining us. And next week, we'll start to get into Acts chapter 2. And we'll bring along some of the other things that we just talked about this week, of course, because we'll have to keep those on our minds as we read. So, shalom, everyone.